I never thought I'd be thanking my parents for making me sleep in the basement, but life has a way of turning the darkest spaces into stepping stones. Before I tell you how I ended up owning the mansion where my sister's wedding turned into the most memorable day of my life, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you've ever been the less favored child or had to fight for your place in your own home, this story is for you. Hit that like button because the revenge in this story is sweeter than wedding cake. My name is Olivia Bennett, and at 28, I've learned that the best revenge isn't served cold. It's served with a perfectly timed property deed. But let me take you back to where it all began, in that basement that my parents claimed was good enough for me. Our house in suburban Boston was a sprawling Victorian mansion, a family heirloom passed down through generations. From the outside, with its pristine white paint and perfectly manicured gardens, it looked like the embodiment of the American dream. Inside, it was a monument to family favoritism that would make Cinderella's stepmother look fair-minded. My sister, Madison, was 3 years younger than me but somehow always managed to be the center of our parents' universe. From the moment she was born, with her perfect blonde curls and winning smile, she became their golden child. I, with my quiet nature and practical mindset, became the family afterthought. The basement bedroom became my space when I was 12, right after Madison decided she wanted the master suite I'd been using. "Your sister needs more space for her dance trophies and social activities," Mom explained, not meeting my eyes as she helped move my belongings down the creaking stairs. "Besides, you're always reading or studying. You don't need all that room." The basement was technically finished, but that's being generous. The concrete floors were covered with thin carpet that did little to mask the cold, and the walls were bare cinder block painted a depressing shade of beige. A small window near the ceiling let in just enough natural light to remind me of what I was missing upstairs. Meanwhile, Madison's new suite was a showcase of parental devotion. They renovated it completely, custom closets, a private bathroom with a spa tub and a sitting area for her friends. "Madison needs to maintain certain social standards," Dad would say whenever I questioned the disparity. "You don't understand the pressures she's under." The pressure of being perfect, I supposed, while I dealt with the pressure of being forgotten. My only ally in the house was our grandmother, Eleanor, who lived in the East Wing. She had grown up in the mansion and knew every creaky floorboard and hidden corner. "This house has secrets," she would tell me during our late-night talks in her cozy sitting room. "And sometimes, dear heart, being underestimated is your greatest advantage." Grandma Eleanor was different from my parents. Where they saw Madison's social butterfly nature as a sign of success, Grandma appreciated my quieter strengths. She was the one who helped me transform my basement space into something livable, bringing down her old Persian rugs to cover the cold floor and hanging vintage tapestries to warm the walls. More importantly, she taught me about the house's history and the family's financial legacy. "Your great-great-grandfather built this place," she'd say, showing me old photographs and documents. "He believed in building things to last, both houses and fortunes." I threw myself into academics and part-time jobs, knowing education was my ticket to independence. By 16, I was working at the local library after school and on weekends. My parents barely noticed my absence, too busy attending Madison's cheerleading competitions and social events. The contrast in their parenting became almost comical. When Madison got her first B+ in English, our parents hired a private tutor. When I made valedictorian, they missed the ceremony because Madison had a regional dance competition. "You don't need the recognition," Mom said when I showed her my acceptance letter to Harvard. "You've always been self-sufficient." She said it like it was a character flaw rather than a survival skill I'd developed out of necessity. The basement became my sanctuary and classroom. I learned to manage money by tracking every dollar earned from my jobs. I learned patience by planning my escape. And I learned resilience from the constant reminder that in my parents' eyes, I would always be the basement daughter. Grandma Eleanor's guidance became more focused during my high school years. She wasn't just teaching me about family history anymore. She was teaching me about investment, property management, and the power of quiet accumulation of wealth. "The basement has made you strong," she told me one night after a particularly difficult family dinner where my parents had praised Madison's mediocre grades while ignoring my scholarship offers. "It's taught you to build your own foundation." I didn't understand the full meaning of her words then, but I would later. College applications became another exercise in family dynamics. Madison applied to state schools with good social scenes. I applied to top-tier universities with strong business programs. When acceptance letters arrived, my parents' reactions were predictable. Harvard? That's so expensive, Olivia. Dad frowned at my acceptance letter. And Boston's so far from home. The same day, they celebrated Madison's acceptance to a local college by buying her a new car. You can take out loans, Mom suggested, not looking up from planning Madison's graduation party. You're good with money. You'll figure it out. What they didn't know was that Grandma Eleanor had been preparing for this moment. The night after the college discussion, she invited me to her sitting room and pulled out a heavy manila envelope. Your great-great-grandfather believed in education, she said, sliding the envelope across the table. He set up a trust for his descendants' education. Your parents never asked about it, too focused on their own inheritance. But you, my dear, are exactly the kind of student he wanted to support. Inside the envelope was documentation of a substantial educational trust, more than enough to cover Harvard's tuition and living expenses. Why didn't you tell them about this? I asked, stunned by the figures on the papers. Grandma's eyes twinkled. Sometimes the best advantage is the one nobody knows you have. Your parents chose to put you in the basement, but they never understood that foundations are built from the bottom up. The summer before college, while Madison was celebrating with her friends and my parents were planning her elaborate going-away party, I was learning everything I could from Grandma Eleanor about our family's financial history. The mansion, it turned out, was part of a larger property portfolio that had been carefully managed through generations. The current ownership was complex, with shares divided among family members through various trusts and holdings. Pay attention, Grandma would say as she walked me through property documents and financial statements. Knowledge is power, especially when others underestimate your ability to understand it. The day I left for Harvard, my parents gave me a perfunctory goodbye, distracted by Madison's drama over her roommate assignments at the local college. Grandma Eleanor hugged me tightly and whispered, "Remember, the basement taught you to see what others miss. Don't waste that lesson." I didn't. At Harvard, I doubled in business and real estate development, working internships during every break. While Madison posted sorority pictures and partied, I was learning how to navigate property laws and investment strategies. My parents' dismissal of my achievements continued through college. They attended none of my presentations or honors ceremonies, always finding reasons why Madison's events took priority. You understand, Mom would say. You're the independent one. I did understand, but not in the way they meant. I understood that their perception of me as the basement daughter had nothing to do with my worth and everything to do with their limitations. During my junior year, Grandma Eleanor's health began to decline. Our late-night discussions moved from her sitting room to her bedroom, but her lessons became more urgent. The mansion isn't just a house, she told me one night, her voice weaker but her eyes sharp as ever. It's a symbol of family legacy. Your parents never understood that. They see it as a status symbol, a backdrop for Madison's social life. But you, my basement girl, you understand foundations. She passed away during my senior year, leaving one final lesson in her will. The reading of the will was held in the mansion's library, with the family gathered in their usual positions. My parents and Madison front and center, me in the back like a shadow. The lawyer's announcement stunned everyone. Grandma Eleanor had left me her substantial investment portfolio and her shares in the family property holdings. To my parents and Madison she left only personal items and a small trust. There must be some mistake, Dad protested, face reddening. Eleanor wouldn't leave everything to the basement daughter? I finished for him, speaking up from my corner. Maybe she saw something you didn't. That day marked the beginning of a shift, though my parents tried to ignore it. They continued treating me as an afterthought, even as I graduated summa cum laude and began building my own real estate investment firm. Madison's life continued on its predictable path. She took a job at a local boutique, more focused on social media influence than career growth. When she met Bradley Winston, son of a prominent local family, my parents were ecstatic. Finally, a wedding to plan. Mom gushed during one of our rare family dinners. We'll host it here, of course. The mansion will be perfect. I sat quietly, letting them plan their perfect event in what they still thought of as their perfect house. They had no idea that I'd been quietly acquiring more shares in the family properties through various investment vehicles. They didn't notice when I started having repairs done on the mansion, assuming it was part of their regular maintenance. They didn't question when I hired landscapers to restore the gardens to their original glory. The basement suite needs renovation, Mom mentioned one day, not looking at me. Bradley's family might want to stay over during wedding events. I smiled, thinking of my old room. Don't worry about the basement, I said. I'll take care of it. They assumed I meant I'd clean it up, never questioning why I had the authority to make renovation decisions. They were too busy planning Madison's perfect wedding to notice that their perfect world was about to shift dramatically. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a flurry of activity. Florists, caterers, and decorators transformed the mansion into a fairy tale setting. Madison held court in her master suite, now filled with wedding gowns and bridesmaids' dresses. I watched it all from my newly renovated office in the city, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal what the basement daughter had been building all these years. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and clear, perfect weather for the outdoor ceremony planned in the mansion's gardens. As I dressed in my bridesmaid's gown, Madison had included me more out of obligation than affection. I thought about Grandma Eleanor's words about foundations and legacies. The time had come to show everyone exactly what the basement had taught me about building from the bottom up. The 6 months leading up to Madison's wedding were a masterclass in family obliviousness. While my parents and sister focused on creating the perfect fairy tale wedding, I was finalizing the last pieces of my carefully constructed plan. My company, Foundation Capital Investments, had grown significantly since its launch 3 years after my Harvard graduation. What started as a small real estate investment firm had expanded into a major player in the Boston property market. Of course, my family remained blissfully unaware of my success, still introducing me as Madison's sister at family gatherings. Olivia does something with apartments, Mom would vaguely explain when pressed, before quickly shifting the conversation back to Madison's wedding plans or Bradley's promising career in his family's law firm. The irony was that by this point my real estate portfolio included several premium commercial properties in downtown Boston, including the building where Bradley's law firm rented office space. I'd attended their lease renewal meetings under my company's name, OB Enterprises, while Bradley had no idea he was negotiating with his future sister-in-law. 3 months before the wedding I made my final move. Using a combination of Grandma Eleanor's inherited shares and my own acquisitions, I consolidated ownership of the mansion under my company's umbrella. The paperwork was filed quietly, the transfer of ownership handled discreetly through my attorneys. My parents, caught up in wedding preparations, signed the documents I presented without reading them carefully, assuming they were routine property maintenance authorizations. Just handling some updates for the wedding, I explained, watching them scrawl their signatures on papers that effectively transferred their remaining ownership rights to me. The mansion's renovation became my personal project, though my family assumed I was just being helpful with wedding preparations. I hired the best contractors in Boston to restore every inch of the property to its original glory, paying particular attention to certain areas that held special meaning. The basement, my old room, was transformed into a state-of-the-art wine cellar and tasting room, with custom wooden racks and climate control systems. "How thoughtful," Mom commented when she saw it. "Bradley's family will love this for the reception." She never once acknowledged that this had been my living space for years. I converted Grandma Eleanor's east wing into a private library and study, preserving her sitting room exactly as it had been during our late-night conversations. Her presence seemed to linger there, encouraging me as I finalized the details of my plan. Madison's beloved master suite received an extensive upgrade, though she assumed it was part of Mom and Dad's wedding gift to her. "The crown molding is perfect for my wedding photos," she gushed during the final fitting of her designer gown. "I'm so glad Daddy spared no expense." I let them all believe what they wanted to believe. After all, they'd spent years seeing only what they expected to see. My personal life wasn't completely consumed by this elaborate plan. I'd met Alexander Drake, a fellow Harvard graduate who ran his own technology investment firm, at a charity gala 2 years earlier. He understood ambition and the complexity of family dynamics, having built his own success despite his parents' initial disapproval of his career choices. "Are you sure you want to wait until the wedding to tell them?" he asked one evening as we reviewed the final property documents in my office. "It's a bit dramatic even for a family revelation." I smiled, thinking of all the family events where I'd been relegated to the background, all the achievements that had gone unacknowledged. They chose the setting for their perfect family moment, I replied. It seems fitting to use it for mine. Alex understood. He'd been my date to enough family dinners to see how they treated me, how they dismissed my contributions while fawning over Madison's latest social media milestone or Bradley's minor legal victories. The week before the wedding, I moved into the mansion's west wing, supposedly to help with last-minute preparations. My parents were too preoccupied with the arriving guests to question why I was setting up an office in what had been my father's study. I spent those nights walking the halls of my house, because it was mine now, every square foot of it, remembering all the moments that had led to this. The kitchen where I'd eaten quick dinners alone while the family celebrated Madison's achievements in the dining room. The grand staircase I'd been told not to use because Madison's friends might come over. The basement that had taught me to build my own light in the darkness. Wedding guests began arriving 3 days before the ceremony. Bradley's family, the wealthy Winstons, took over the newly renovated guest suites. My parents fawned over them, eager to impress their future in-laws with what they still thought of as their family mansion. The house has been in our family for generations, Dad boasted during the rehearsal dinner hosted in the formal dining room. We've maintained all its original grandeur. I caught Alex's eye across the table, noting his subtle smirk. He'd helped me review the property's maintenance records during the acquisition. My parents had actually neglected significant structural issues over the years, too focused on surface appearances. It had taken considerable investment on my part to restore the mansion's true grandeur. The night before the wedding, I found Madison in her suite, surrounded by wedding finery. For a moment, looking at her surrounded by luxury she'd always taken for granted, I felt a twinge of sympathy. She'd been shaped by our parents' favoritism as much as I had, just in a different way. Need any help? I offered, standing in the doorway. She looked up, surprised. We'd never been close, our relationship defined by the roles we'd been assigned in childhood. Thanks, but I've got my bridesmaids coming over. She paused, then added awkwardly, you can help with the guest favors if you want. They're in the basement. Of course. The basement. Some habits died hard. Actually, I replied, I have some work to finish up in the study. But everything will be perfect tomorrow. I've made sure of it. She didn't catch the weight in my words, already distracted by a text from one of her bridesmaids. I left her there, surrounded by the trappings of the perfect wedding our parents had planned in my house. That night I sat in Grandma Eleanor's sitting room, now my private study, reviewing the documents I'd need for tomorrow. The property deed, ownership transfers, renovation receipts. Everything that proved what the basement daughter had built while they weren't paying attention. Alex joined me there, loosening his tie after the rehearsal dinner. Your grandmother would be proud, he said, looking around the preserved room. She taught you well. She taught me that foundations matter, I replied, touching the antique desk where she'd first shown me the family's property documents. And that sometimes the strongest structures are built in the dark. Tomorrow, in the middle of Madison's perfect wedding reception, everyone would learn exactly what the basement had built. My parents would finally understand what they'd missed while focusing on their golden child. The mansion's true owner would be revealed, and the family dynamic would shift permanently. As I prepared for bed in my new master suite, not Madison's old one, but a completely renovated wing that suited my tastes, I thought about the journey from the basement to here. Every dismissal, every missed achievement, every cold night in that concrete room had led to this moment. Tomorrow the basement daughter would welcome everyone to her house. And nothing would ever be the same. The morning of Madison's wedding dawned exactly as perfect as my parents had prayed for: clear blue skies, mild temperature, and just enough breeze to make the garden roses dance. I stood at the window of my study, watching the flurry of activity below as workers arranged chairs on the lawn and erected the elaborate floral arch where my sister would say her vows. Everything was perfect, exactly as they'd planned. Just not quite in the way they'd expected. The mansion buzzed with activity. My mother fluttered between rooms in her silk robe, directing staff and fussing over details. My father held court in what he still thought of as his study, sharing cigars with Bradley's father and talking about family legacy. Madison remained sequestered in her suite with her bridesmaids, probably sharing mimosas and Instagram stories. I dressed carefully in my bridesmaid's gown, A designer piece in blush pink that cost more than my entire teenage wardrobe. The irony wasn't lost on me that Madison had chosen the color because it made everyone look secondary to the bride. Today that wouldn't be the case. Alex arrived early, impeccable in his tailored suit. "Ready for this?" he asked, helping me fasten my grandmother's pearl necklace, another inheritance my parents had questioned. "I've been ready since the basement," I replied, touching the property deed secured in my clutch bag. Some celebrations are worth waiting for. The ceremony itself was a showcase of excess. 500 guests filled the garden chairs. Society's finest gathered to witness the union of the Winston and Bennett families. String quartets played as the bridal party processed down the petal-strewn aisle. Madison floated toward her future husband in a custom gown that cost more than a college education. I played my part perfectly, holding my sister's bouquet and smiling for photographs. My parents beamed from the front row, their golden child's perfect day unfolding exactly as they'd imagined. Bradley's parents sat beside them, already discussing future family gatherings at the Bennett estate. After the ceremony, guests moved to the reception tent set up on the east lawn. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their light catching on hand-painted china and silver settings for hundreds. The champagne alone cost more than my first car, though now I was the one who had signed off on the expenses. The first hint that something was different came during the father-daughter dance. Dad, slightly flushed from champagne, took the microphone to make a toast. "Welcome everyone to our family home," he began, gesturing grandly. "For generations the Bennett mansion has been—" "Excuse me," I interrupted, standing from my seat at the family table. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about the hosting duties." The room quieted. Madison, still in my father's arms mid-dance, frowned in confusion. My mother's perfect smile froze in place. "Olivia," Dad said warningly, "this isn't the time for—" "Actually," I continued, opening my clutch and removing the property deed, "this is exactly the time. Welcome everyone to my home." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the string quartet stopped playing. "What are you talking about?" Madison demanded, stepping away from our father. "This is our family home." I corrected, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned reception tent. "While you were planning your perfect wedding, you never bothered to check who owned the perfect venue." I nodded to Alex, who stood and began distributing copies of the property documents to key family members. My parents, Bradley's parents, and the family lawyer, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. 3 months ago, I continued, watching my father's face drain of color as he read the papers, the Bennett mansion and grounds were fully consolidated under my company's ownership. Every renovation, every upgrade, every perfect detail of this wedding was approved and paid for by me. "This is impossible," Mom whispered, but the lawyer was already nodding reluctantly, confirming the document's authenticity. "Remember the basement?" I asked, looking directly at my parents. "While you were giving Madison the master suite and telling me I didn't deserve better, I was learning about foundations. Grandma Eleanor taught me well." Bradley's father, a shrewd businessman, was the first to fully grasp the situation. "The Bennett mansion is owned by OB Enterprises," he said slowly. "Olivia Bennett. You're the property developer who's been buying up half of Boston's historic estates." Madison's perfect complexion had turned ashen. But this is my wedding. You can't." "Can't what?" I asked calmly. "Can't own the house I grew up in? Can't succeed beyond your expectations? Can't rise from the basement?" The murmurs among the guests grew louder. Years of society gossip about the Bennett sisters was being rapidly revised as my success became apparent. "Why didn't you tell us?" Dad demanded, his voice mixing anger with dawning recognition of what they'd missed. "I tried. For years I tried to show you my achievements, my potential. But you were too busy looking up at Madison to see what was growing in the basement." I turned to address the gathered guests. "Please enjoy the celebration. Consider this my housewarming party as well as my sister's wedding." The next hour was chaos, but controlled chaos. My parents huddled with Bradley's family, probably doing damage control about the shift in family dynamics. Madison alternated between tears and accusations, her perfect day now overshadowed by her basement-dwelling sister's revelation. But something unexpected happened too. Guests began approaching me not with condemnation but with interest. Business cards were exchanged. Investment opportunities were discussed. The basement daughter had emerged into the light, and she had built something worth noticing. I always knew there was something special about you, my third cousin Margaret declared, eyes shining with renewed family connection. You have Eleanor's spark. As the evening progressed, the initial shock gave way to a new reality. My parents aged years and hours, their carefully constructed narrative of family success crumbling around them. Madison's glow dimmed as she realized she was no longer the center of attention at her own wedding. Bradley, to his credit, handled the situation better than expected. I should have known, he said when we spoke privately. The lease negotiations for our firm's offices were too professional to be the old Bennett management. Near midnight, as the celebration wound down, I found myself in Grandma Eleanor's sitting room, my sitting room now. My parents appeared in the doorway, looking uncertain for the first time in my memory. Why this way? Mom asked quietly. Why at Madison's wedding? I considered the question, touching the desk where Grandma had first taught me about property values and family legacy. Because you gave me the basement and told me I deserved nothing better, I replied. I needed you to understand that the basement built something you never saw coming. We underestimated you, Dad admitted, looking older than I'd ever seen him. We were wrong. Yes, I agreed simply. You were. They left shortly after, their perfect world permanently altered. Madison and Bradley departed for their honeymoon, though the celebration had become more of a coming-out party for the family's true success story. Alex found me later in what had been my basement room, now a premium wine cellar. How does it feel? He asked, pulling me close. I looked around the transformed space, remembering the cold concrete and thin carpeting. It feels like foundation, I replied. Sometimes you have to start in the basement to build something strong. The mansion settled around us, creaking and sighing as old houses do. But now it spoke of different things, not of favoritism and forgotten daughters, but of persistence and quiet triumph. The basement daughter had risen, bringing with her all the lessons learned in the dark. 3 months after the wedding, I received a letter from Madison. Her perfect life had shifted. Bradley's firm was now my tenant, and her social circle had to reconcile her carefully curated image with her more successful sister. I never saw you, she wrote. None of us did. I'm sorry for that. I read the letter in my study, surrounded by the evidence of what can be built from a basement foundation. Outside, garden workers were preparing the grounds for winter, following my instructions to preserve Grandma Eleanor's beloved roses. The basement had taught me patience, resilience, and the power of being underestimated. It had shaped me into someone who could rise above expectations and build something lasting. Welcome to my house indeed.